My name's Elena. I'm 28. And my parents told a room full of people they wished I had never been born. The words didn't arrive as a quiet aside. They hit the room like dropped glass. It was at their 35th anniversary. In a ballroom filled with 150 guests, white tablecloths, a string quartet in the corner, and a banner that said, "A love that lasts." My brother, Marcus, is a cardiac surgeon who can thread a catheter through a hair's width of artery while making the nurses laugh. My sister, Sloane, just made partner at 26. I teach art to kids on weekends and work as a freelance designer in a studio apartment that smells faintly of coffee and acrylics. On paper, it's a life that fits in the margins. To my parents, the margins might as well be the trash can. For as long as I remember, Marcus has been the golden child, polished, framed, displayed under the best lighting. Sloane is the second son, bright enough to turn heads and warm every conversation she enters. I'm the third thing, the odd one, the cautionary tale. With ink under her nails, it didn't used to hurt this openly. It was death by 1,000 small reclassifications. Elena's little drawings, said with a smile that never touched their eyes. She's figuring it out. As if adult life were a hallway I kept missing. Earlier that afternoon, my mother stood with our Aunt Renee and Mrs. Patel near the dessert table and said, "Elena's still doing her little graphics." She used the same tone you would use to describe a child stacking blocks. I had just been featured in a design magazine for the rebrand of a major fintech company, 6 months of work. A contract worth $84,000 before taxes. A team I'd led through 12 versions and a launch that moved their signups by 19%. I heard my mother's sentence, and the numbers slid off me like rain off glass. Renee tried to redirect. "Did you see the article? Page 32, but my mother only tilted her head. "It's cute," she said. There was a lemon tart in her hand. She peeled the twist of rind and didn't look at me. I should have known. The speeches were supposed to be simple. My father took the microphone and thanked the guests, then shifted to his favorite subject, outcomes. "Our son, Dr. Marcus Novak," he said, "saves lives every day." Applause. A nod toward Sloane, and Sloane, already partner, showing the world what grit and brilliance look like. More applause. He never turned his eyes where I was sitting. He let the silence outline me like chalk around a missing shape. When my mother stepped up, she smiled wide and said, "We have been blessed with 2 extraordinary children." And I felt the room hiccup. Several faces swung toward me. A reflex. My name didn't cross her lips. My chair might as well have been empty. After the clinks and cheers, I found them in a crescent of old friends. Mrs. Patel, who once taught me algebra, asked about my work. Before I could answer, my mother's smile went brittle. "Honestly," she said, "sometimes I wonder what we did to deserve such a disappointment." People shifted. My father placed a hand on her shoulder, as if to calm her or to steady himself. It was hard to tell. "It's been difficult," he said. "You raise your children with certain hopes and expectations. And when one of them refuses to live up to their potential, it's heartbreaking." "I'm standing right here," I said. "We know," my mother replied, not looking at me. "We've always known you were there, Elena. Sometimes we wish you were never born. Our lives would have been so much simpler with just 2 children who actually appreciated everything we did." Silence is rarely pure. It rustled through sequin dresses and cufflinks, coughed against glassware, pressed heat into my ears. Somewhere behind me, a fork slipped and pinged against tile. My hands shook so hard, I had to set down my wine glass to keep from spilling. I looked at my father for any sign regret. Alarm. Love. But he looked only tired. The way people look when the traffic light has been red too long. For 28 years, I had built bridges toward them. I took the city bus to my first portfolio class because they said they wouldn't throw away $1. $200 on a high school art camp. I paid my own tuition at the Design Institute, $11. $400 the first semester because they told me art school wasn't real college. I won a state poster competition and my mother called it nice practice. When I landed my first Fortune 500 client, my father said, Let us know when you have a steady job. When I rented a tiny studio and painted the walls, teal the color that feels like air with a memory, my mother walked in, wrinkled her nose, and said, "We'll repaint that. It looks juvenile." We did. I cried for 3 days and learned to cry quietly. Tonight, something aligned. Maybe it was the way my name blotted out of the program, Marcus. Sloan. Slideshow of family milestones. And then a vague bullet point. Remarks like the printer itself had absorbed their worldview. Maybe it was the lemon rind twist that rolled to my shoe. Sticky on the underside from a spill. No one wiped. Maybe it was the sentence finally spoken aloud. Wish you were never born. It was so explicit, it stripped away all the plausible deniability. I straightened. My spine felt like a line I could measure my life against. If that's what you wish, I said, clear enough to cut through the clatter. Then consider me as if I never existed. I turned to my father. You just got your desire. 2 children instead of 3. Congratulations. The word tasted like a small, hot coin. People were staring now. Their expressions a collage pity. Fascination. Alarm. I scanned their faces and added, for anyone who cares. It was never that I didn't appreciate what they did for me. It's that they never appreciated who I am. There's a difference. I walked away. My heels clicked on marble. A metronome for a new pace. Marcus called after me. Elena. Wait, but he sounded like someone shouting from the far end of a tunnel. Outside, the air felt colder and more honest. I sat in my car and sobbed for 20 minutes. Not only for tonight, but for the time my father told me, stop wasting Saturdays on paint. Internships at $0 now become $80. 000 later. And I took a cafe internship anyway for $12 an hour because the owner let me redesign their menu. For the time, my mother said, if you want us at your senior show, buy us tickets. And the tickets were $45 each, and I covered them with the grocery money I'd saved. For the time, I pitched a nonprofit rebrand for free because they couldn't afford it. And my parents called it charity clout. I cried for every time I was a footnote in my own house. When I finally checked my phone, there were 38 missed calls and a storm of texts. Marcus, where did you go? Everyone's panicking. Dad had to sit down. Sloan, you made a scene. Really mature. My mother, you have embarrassed us. Then, your father isn't feeling well. And finally, if something happens to him because of your stunt, it's on you. Not one message said, we're sorry. Not one asked, are you okay? I stared at the screen until my reflection blurred in it. I should have known. I should have known from the photos. The next morning, I pulled out the heavy albums my mother keeps on the top shelf of the hallway closet. The ones she's always said, we'll sort someday. On the cover of one, a tiny blob of mustard from a picnic years ago had dried to an amber fleck, a small fossilized accident. Inside, the pattern was myth and map. In every family photo, Marcus is in the center. Sloan is next to our mother. Their hair catching the same light. I am at the edge. Leaning in or not quite in. In the photo from Marcus's med school white coat ceremony, my parents are glowing. I am half cropped with an arm raised, as if I'm waving goodbye. His graduation portrait hangs in the living room, above the piano. Sloan's law school frame sits beside it. Mine, my honors certificate from the Institute. The Portfolio Review Award is tucked in a drawer with expired coupons. For as long as I remember, they have praised results, they recognize and ignored the kind they don't. When I told my father that my poster had been selected for the city's summer festival, he said, did they pay you $750? I said, and his eyebrows moved, impressed against his will. Then settled. When I sent my mother a photo of the FinTech billboard with the logo I designed 15 feet high, she wrote back, make sure you save for retirement. Art isn't forever. When I texted, I got 3 new students for Saturday. She replied, babysitting is sweet. But isn't it time to be serious? I teach color theory to 8-year-olds who light up when they make purple from red and blue. I've watched a shy kid, Noah, paint a tiny storefront from memory and whisper, I want to make places feel like this. Tell me how that is not serious. And yet, I tried to make it make sense. I sent them spreadsheets. I said, I paid off $7, 300 of my student loans this year. I said, my quarterly estimate was $6, 850. I'm doing fine. They nodded and moved on to Marcus's latest case, or Sloane's deal. Love, I learned, is not a ledger. You can balance by adding more numbers. It is a kind of attention. It is where eyes land and stay. At the anniversary, those eyes moved everywhere. But to me, so I did the only thing I hadn't done yet. I removed myself from the equation. If being absent made me matter for 30 panicked minutes, then maybe absence was the only language they would hear. When I pressed the ignition and pulled onto the street, the city lights didn't look celebratory or accusing. They looked neutral, like a blank canvas that hadn't made up its mind. I don't know what people in that ballroom said after I left. I imagine the hush breaking into gossip, the quartet faltering, Renee lifting her chin and telling someone, she's not dramatic. She's done. I imagine my mother reaching for a script and finding there wasn't one. I imagine my father sitting, breathing hard, understanding the difference between control and consequence. But what I know is this: in the quiet of my car, with my hands still shaky and my heart raw, a line formed that I could finally respect. They had wished I'd never been born. I gave them what they said they wanted. And for the first time, the space left behind felt like room. I didn't sleep that night. I stacked and unstacked dishes, scrolled through my inbox, rearranged brushes in their jars until the bristles all faced the same direction, like soldiers pretending they weren't tired. Around 4 in the morning, I opened my calendar and dragged a bright red block over the next 4 weekends. No family events. It felt small and defiant, like planting a flag on a square foot of ground and calling it mine. By 7, the adrenaline had burned off, and the ache set in the kind that settles behind your ribs like damp weather. I made coffee, strong enough to stand a spoon in, and pulled the ladder from the closet. The albums were up top, far back, where my mother always said, we'll sort those someday. Dust eddied in the beam of morning sun as I tugged the first one free. On the cover, a smear of old mustard from a long-ago picnic had dried into a honey-colored oval, one tiny, stubborn stain the cleanup missed. I ran my thumb over it and felt the grit. You can scrub a table, but something always remains. Inside. The photos confirmed what my memory had argued for years. Marcus at center, lifted high, light, catching the white of his coat. My father's pride, bright as a second tie. Sloane beside our mother, shoulder to shoulder, mirroring each other's smiles, like a before and after ad, where both versions won. Me at the edge. In one picture of a ski trip, my face is half hidden behind a pillar. In another, my hand is mid-wave, blurred, as if I were already leaving the frame. When I found my Design Institute commencement photo, there were fingerprints on the glass, not from being admired, from being handled and put away. I opened the living room drawer where my mother stashes batteries and instruction manuals, and pulled out a thin black frame. There I was. Cap tilde. Eyes puffy from crying because I'd had to buy both of my parents $45 tickets to get them to come. They'd arrived late and left early because parking is impossible downtown. I kept turning pages. A program fell out from Marcus's first big surgery. Lead attending doctor, Marcus Novak. My father had underlined it twice in blue pen. In a margin of another page, a clipping about Sloane's firm closing a deal my mother had written, our girl in looping script, and added 3 hearts. I sat down on the hallway floor with the album propped against my knees and let the quiet come. It wasn't that my parents didn't care about me. It was that their caring had conditions I never learned to meet. They spoke a dialect of accomplishment that didn't include color, composition, or the way a logo can hold a story. At 9, my phone lit again. Marcus, please pick up. Dad's blood pressure spiked. He's okay now. Elena. This isn't you. It's them. But you can't just vanish. Sloane HR at my firm was there. Elena. Do you even realize what you did? Then. A second message. Whatever. Do what you want. My mother's thread went from accusation to logistics. We need to talk. Can you come by at 2? Then don't make this harder than it is. It was wild how quickly their crisis tried to become my assignment. I put the phone face down and opened my laptop instead. Work has always been a steadier mirror. I answered 3 client emails, including one from the fintech company whose launch we'd nailed last quarter. Can you consult on the micro brand for our student tier? The product manager wrote. Budget $36. Ling ling ling. Timeline, 6 weeks. You're the only person who understands how to make us look trustworthy without looking old. I stared at that sentence and felt an odd combination of gratitude and grief. Here were strangers who saw me clearly, while people who had raised me kept squinting. Before responding, I opened my accounting software. Numbers ground me. Invoice 104. Invoices paid 2. Retainer renewals pending 1. Q3 taxes set así de $6. Bye-bye Woosher. Savings for the eventual bigger studio, $12. Sube. I added a line item, Emergency Emotional Repair Fund, and put $300 in it because I knew I needed something ridiculous and kind to look forward to, maybe a weekend by the lake with a sketchbook. Maybe a teal armchair. No one could repaint but me. At 10. The doorbell rang. I froze, thinking of my mother's texts. But when I looked through the peephole, it was Aunt Renee, standing there with a paper bag and her hair in a messy bun, like she'd sprinted out the door before talking herself out of it. I let her in, and she hugged me without commentary. From the bag, she pulled 2 bagels, a jar of jam, and the kind of orange juice that only people who love you will buy because it costs too much. I'm not here to fix anything, she said. I'm here to sit on your floor and agree with you. We did exactly that. We sat cross-legged among the albums and coffee cups while I recounted the quotes. Each one a small blade. They said, sometimes we wish you were never born. I told her again, as if repetition could make it less absurd. Renee closed her eyes. Your mother's been performing neatness her whole life, she said softly. You are not a mess. Elena, you're just not tidy by their rules. I told her about the times I tried to fit the rules. I mailed them a spreadsheet once. I said, half laughing, line items, rent $1. Sabawusher. Utilities $132. Grocery budget $260. Health insurance $410. Monthly loan payment $610. Then I wrote, I am not floundering. I am choosing. My mother called and said, this would all be easier if you had a proper job. Renee winced. And last winter, I added, I did that charity rebrand for the shelter. 40 hours. $0. Because they couldn't pay. Mom said, don't be naive. You're not a saint. But the donations went up 22% after the launch. The director cried when we turned on the new signage. That felt like church. Those are receipts, Renee said, tapping the air, not just numbers evidence. The doorbell rang again. Instinct sent heat up my spine. But Renee squeezed my wrist. If you don't want to open it, don't. He hesitated. Then check the peephole. Marcus. He stood there in scrubs under a jacket. Eyes puffy. I opened the door a crack. I won't stay, he said quickly. Are you okay? It was the first time that question had arrived unhooked from an agenda. I surprised myself by saying, not really. He nodded, like he'd been rehearsing that exact exchange. I should have stepped in last night, he said. I froze. I thought if I caused a scene it would make it worse. But it was already worse. He pulled a folded page from his pocket, printed screenshots. I saw the magazine feature, he said. I showed the cardiac team. We were impressed. That rebrand was clean and smart. I'm sorry it wasn't us who said that first. Something unknotted in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but the loosening that comes from someone naming the right thing. Thank you, I said. He handed me the pages and a little square of paper torn from his notepad. On it he'd written a list. Dad said, manage optics. Mom said she embarrassed us. Sloan said my reputation. I said nothing. I'm sorry for that. He looked at Renee. Please take care of her, he said. And to me, I'll call tonight. But if you don't pick up, I'll understand. He left before I could answer, which might have been the kindest part. After he was gone, I exhaled hard. The afternoon stretched. Blank and fragile. My phone buzzed clients. Not family. The student tier project confirmed at $36. Ling ling ling. Another inquiry for a boutique hotel. Budget in the $20-25K range. Launch in 8 weeks. I typed replies with a professional calm that felt like armor I'd earned. Between emails, I stood and stretched and felt something else. The absence of the headache that usually arrived like clockwork after any holiday with my family. It didn't show. My body had been keeping score. Now it was recalibrating. Around 2. My building's intercom crackled. This time I didn't even check. I pressed end and returned to my desk. A minute later, my phone lit with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Finally a text came through. Please pick up. It's me. Sloan. Against my better judgment. I answered. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice flat. You can't ghost us, she said. In the background, I heard the hiss of a cappuccino machine. She was at a cafe, still moving through a day that, hadn't punctured anything. Hey, said clients saw. Marcus told me Dad had to be checked. We need to manage this. There it is. I said quietly. Manage. I don't mean it like that. She rushed. I mean, Elena. Come home. We can talk. Mom's upset. She said some things she didn't mean. She said them for 35 years. I answered. Last night was just the first time she stopped decorating them. Sloan inhaled sharply. You're being dramatic, she said. And my shoulder muscles tightened, as if they knew exactly where this was going. You made a statement in a full room. I answered a statement. I cut in. You all made yours first. 2 children. There was a beat. Then, in a smaller voice, fine. But can you at least check on Dad? The request was reasonable, on its face. I leaned against the counter and looked at the album sprawled on the rug. Is he in danger? I asked. No, she said. Marcus says he's stable. But he's hurt. I closed my eyes. So am I? I let the silence sit. The way a teacher might let a child feel the shape of a lesson. If there's a medical emergency, call me, I said. Otherwise, I'm not available. I hung up before she could turn my boundary into a negotiation. By evening, I'd answered every client message and set up 2 discovery calls for the next day. Renee left with a promise to come back Tuesday, with proper soup and a story. I showered and put on the softest sweatshirt I own, the one with paint freckles on the sleeves, like a constellation. I made tea. For the first time in months. My apartment felt like a place and not a storage unit. I slept in between obligations. The teal accent wall in my tiny living room glowed dusky and calm. No one was going to repaint it. Just before bed, I opened a new document and titled it, Statement for Myself. Not for social media. Not for family. Just for me. I listed 3 incidents. Clean and true. Age 17, we won't waste $1. 200 on that art camp. Took the bus. Earned a partial scholarship. Sold 3 prints for $50 each. Realized strangers would pay for something only I could make. Age 21. Art school. Isn't real college. Paid $11. 400. First semester myself. Graduated top 5% in cohort. Landed first corporate contract at $18. 000 for a 6-week sprint. Age 28. Sometimes we wish you were never born. Answer, consider me as if I never existed. Left. In the 30 minutes after, 38 missed calls. 0 apologies. Then, beneath those, I wrote one more line. What I choose next counts more than what they said last. The next morning, the city felt different. Maybe nothing had changed, but the angle of my attention, I woke without dread. Made oatmeal. Sketched while it cooled. On the pad, I drew a simple mark, a door. Slightly ajar. With a line of light leaking through. It was amateur and perfect. I tacked it to the wall beside my desk like a compass. At 9:15, the boutique hotel called. At 10:00, the fintech team and I whiteboarded over video the colors and type for the student tier, no navy. We decided 2 parental, something fresh without tipping into juvenile. At noon, I walked to the corner market and bought tulips in a shade between coral and salmon because they looked like celebration in a life that hadn't had enough. At 2:30, Marcus texted, I told them I won't attend any conversation where you're outnumbered. If they want to talk, it'll be with a mediator, or not at all. I typed back, thank you. He sent a single checkmark emoji, and it felt like a promise. That night, as I rinsed my cup, I caught my reflection in the dark window, tired. Yes, but aligned the way a column looks when the carpenter finally sands it. True. The intercom stayed silent. No one demanded I adjust my palette. My phone sat face down. I went to bed and slept so deeply I dreamed in color blocks: teal, a calm square, lemon, a bright circle, a mustard fleck at the corner, stubborn, real, and finally just part of the picture rather than the whole story. I didn't know yet that by the end of the week, my mother would show up at my class. That the word therapy would enter our family's vocabulary like a foreign coin. We weren't sure how to spend. I didn't know that I would be asked a question about my favorite color by the one person who never seemed curious before. All I knew was this. I had stepped out of a room where I was invisible, and into a smaller room where I was not. The air in that smaller room tasted like rain before it falls. Something was coming. And for once, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was bracing for change. 3 days after the anniversary, I realized my phone had become a weather radio for a storm I no longer planned to stand in. Alerts flashed. Warnings blared. But outside my window, the sky over my small street was mild blue. A polite breeze flipping the corner of a flyer someone had taped to a lamppost. I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb. Added a single exception for emergencies from one person, Marcus, and set it face down. Then I put both hands on my desk, like a captain who had decided which direction to sail. The first week was rupture and ritual. Every morning I did the same 3 things before reading a single message, made coffee, sketched for 15 minutes without judging the lines, and wrote a short list titled, Evidence I Exist. The items were small and embarrassingly true. I watered the pothos and it perked up. Noah asked if he could try my teal marker and his whole face lit. I met a deadline without a headache. On Tuesday, I added, I laughed out loud alone, and it wasn't weird. I printed the lists and taped them beside my desk like flags on a mountain route. Whenever the old fear, what if they're right about me, flared, I looked left and counted the flags. Meanwhile, the family machine spun and clanked on. Sloan tried efficiency first. We should meet at the house Sunday at 2. I booked a conference room at the club if you prefer neutral territory, and then guilt. The optics are awful. People will remember, and then indignation, which always came dressed as adulthood. You're being unreasonable. Families argue and apologize and move on. My mother's cadence ran more personal. This stress is affecting your father. A good daughter would sort this out. You have said enough. Now let us handle it. My father sent one message that might have been typed by a lawyer. We would like to resolve the current misunderstanding as a family and preserve our reputation. I read it twice and set the phone down as if it were hot. The word misunderstanding sat in my chest like a pebble in a shoe. It made every step hurt. Marcus didn't text much. When he did, it was surgical. How's your sleep, or got food, or the single-letter check-in he started during my finals week years ago. K. He seemed to understand that words could either inflame or stitch. And he chose the latter. One night, he called, and I let it ring twice before answering. I'm here, he said. I'm not asking you to do anything. Just, where are you? I looked around my small apartment, sunset slipping through blinds. 2 mugs in the sink. The teal wall catching the last of the light, and said, home. He exhaled. Okay. Good. Silence. Then I booked Dad a follow-up. He's fine. Blood pressure rides up when he's cornered, and when he's cornering, cause and effect. I huffed a laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. You're funny when you're exhausted. I said, I'm honest when I'm done. He replied, at work. The world behaved like a world. The boutique hotel sent a mood board sun-faded brick. Patinaed brass. A revoir at dusk. The fintech team approved the first pass of color and type, with one note. Let's avoid anything that feels scolding or corporate. Our students are allergic to lecture. I grinned. Same. I muttered. Then wrote back something professional. I built a deck that explained why honesty reads better at 12px than fear does at 18px. I coded responsive versions of the logo so it breathed on a phone screen. The hotel called to say the owner cried at the sight of the first mock-up for their key cards, a simple line drawing of their facade, in a coral that made the old building look new, without erasing itself. It feels like we've always been this, she said. I took the compliment and then shut my laptop and cried too. Because it hit a nerve. I hadn't named the wish to keep what is ours, and still get to be seen. The second week, the outside world chimed in. People from the anniversary began to choose sides. Or at least angles. A neighbor I barely knew slipped a note under my door. I was there. You were brave. If you need cat sitting, I'm around. My high school art teacher, Ms. Cho, emailed to say she'd heard some noise and wanted me to know. She still showed my senior portfolio to students. The one with the storefronts. She wrote, "You drew kindness into those doors." That sentence folded me in half on my couch. Kindness into those doors. I'd forgotten. Not all commentary was gentle. A college acquaintance posted something vague online about people who expect applause for coloring. I recognized the shape of the insult and felt heat rush to my face, and then, to my surprise, cool in minutes. Most of the fire that used to scorch me didn't find purchase now. It was like my skin had learned what was mine to absorb and what wasn't. I blocked. Moved on. Put my hands back on the work. On Thursday of that week, I taught my weekend kids an extra class because their school had an in-service day. We did a lesson on negative space, how a shape becomes itself partly by what it is not. So if you draw a chair, I told them, you need to draw the air under the seat. Otherwise, your drawing will float weirdly. They tried. They made ghosts of chairs and then chairs that sat convincingly on floors. At the end, Noah Small, serious, brought me his page. He'd drawn a storefront again. Windows level. A little bell over the door. There's a good store inside, he said. Not fancy, just good. I swallowed past a lump and said, I would go there. That night, Aunt Renee returned with soup and a story and as promised. Once, she said, setting a pot on my stove. Your mother and I saved up for matching bikes. We were 12 and 10. I wanted blue. She wanted white. At the store, our father said white would show dirt and blue was cheap looking. He bought us red. Your mother rode hers, like it was exactly perfect. I wiped mine constantly and still felt stained. Some people learn very early not to argue with the color authority. Some people become the authority. We ate and let the steam fog my glasses. I loved those red bikes by August, she added. But it took all summer. I smiled. I don't have that kind of summer in me. I said, I know. She replied, that's not a flaw. On the Friday of week 2, I answered a call from an unknown number because intuition nudge-tapped me. It was Mrs. Patel, my old algebra teacher. Her voice warm as ever. I hope I'm not overstepping, she said. But I wanted to tell you something I couldn't say the other night, with all the ears around. Your mother wasn't like this when you were small. She was nervous. Yes, wanting things just so, but she adored you. The first year you drew, she carried your scribbles in her purse like relics. The air in my lungs thinned. What happened? I asked before I could calibrate for etiquette. She hesitated, then said, Marcus's heart scare at age 8 changed the house. Then the scholarship pressure for Sloan. Your mother's love started to hitch itself to outcomes. She mistook safety for control and control for proof. It isn't right. It's just what it is. I closed my eyes. A dangerous relief washed through me, not to excuse, but to contextualize. It made the forest look less like chaos and more like a map drawn hastily under stress. Thank you, I said. You're welcome, she replied. And Elena, I've followed your work. I am proud of you. Algebra taught me there are many ways to solve for x. Week 3 began with rain and a phone call. I didn't expect a former classmate, Jonah, who now runs a small agency. asking if I'd consider subcontracting on a national campaign. Your sense of narrative is the only reason I'm calling, he said. You always knew where to put the beat that made people lean in. I said I'd think about it and then thought about it for exactly 90 seconds before saying yes. My calendar began to look like intention instead of defense. I moved the plant that never quite thrived to the window. It stood a little straighter within a day. And I took an unreasonable amount of pride in being the kind of person who could read a plant. I also dreamed differently. Before, nightmares, the usual, walking into a room full of family and shrinking to the size of a thumb, finding all my work had been replaced with blank pages, trying to speak and discovering my mouth was full of dust. Now, quieter dreams sorting paints by hue. A room full of windows. Marcus and me building a shelf with more nails than we needed. Laughing when it stood anyway. In one dream, I watched a wall change color by itself from gray to teal, and no one argued. I woke up with the certainty that my brain had gotten tired of bracing. There were missteps. One afternoon I answered a call I shouldn't have and heard my mother crying. The sound wrapped around my spine like a vine. I didn't mean it. She said, "You can't take one sentence and turn it into a life sentence." I gripped the counter. It wasn't one sentence. I said, slower than my anger wanted. It was the policy behind it. Enforced for years. She sniffed. You always speak like a consultant. The policy. The evidence. I could hear the flip about to happen, her tears evaporating into a lecture about respect. I'm hanging up now. I said, if you want to talk when you are ready to hear me, I will listen. If not, I won't. She said my name. 2 syllables stretched. But I ended the call. I set the phone down like it was an egg. I didn't want to crack and leaned my forehead on the cool cabinet door until my breath evened. That evening, Marcus texted, "She's spiraling. I'm trying to coax her toward a professional. Not a performance. No promises." I replied, "Thank you." Then, because I didn't want every exchange to be triage, I added, "I bought tulips the color of sunrise. You would approve." He sent back a photo of a vending machine noodle cup with the caption, "Fine dining," and beneath it, "Proud of you." I put the phone face down and let that land fully. Proud of you. The phrase didn't pinch coming from him. It fit. By midweek, my classes were full. A new parent wrote, "We saw the flyer. We want our daughter to learn from someone who believes creativity is serious." I stared at that sentence the way you stare at a neat dovetail joint, admiring how snug the pieces fit. I wrote a lesson plan on color temperature and how warm and cool can make the same red feel like anger or a heartbeat, depending on its neighbors. I thought of my family and the way proximity can change meaning. I thought of how, for years, I stood next to a set of expectations that made my palate look wrong. Then I pictured my small apartment. My choices moving in like furniture that belonged. On Friday of week 3, the boutique hotel sent payment early, with a note. We've never felt so understood by a visual. I forwarded the invoice to my accountant, and then, on impulse, drove to the hardware store. I bought a tiny can of paint, the exact teal that had once turned my bedroom into a battleground. The cashier asked if I wanted the sample brush. I said yes. Back home, I taped off a little square on the wall near the door and painted it slow. The color bloomed like a secret revealed. I sat on the floor and watched it dry. When it was done, I wrote next to it in pencil, "Small mine." That night, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I heard what happened. It said, "I was a server at the event. I just wanted to say you handled it with grace. A lot of us were rooting for you." I wrote back, "Thank you," and meant it more than she could know. The anonymous kindness of strangers kept surprising me. It felt like a chorus I hadn't noticed before, humming under the lead. At the end of the 3rd week, a message arrived that felt different. The second I saw the preview, "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner. You deserved better from all of us. Marcus." I typed and erased 3 drafts before landing on Frost. "Thank you for saying that. It matters." He replied, "I'm looking for a therapist who'll take them both. Already made a short list." I blinked at the screen. The word therapist sat like a new appliance on a familiar counter out of place. A little loud. Commanding attention, I went to sleep that night, with the window cracked and the sound of distant traffic folding into the room like a tide. In the dark, I said a sentence. I didn't expect to say aloud, I want a mother. It wasn't a plea. It was an orientation. Like a compass needle shivering into north. I didn't know what shape that want would take, whether it would be met or remain an ache I would carry with dignity. I only knew that naming it felt like stepping onto a path I had been circling for years. In the morning, I woke before my alarm and made toast and jam and a plan for the day that didn't include catastrophes. I packed my satchel for Saturday class fresh markers. Extra needed erasers. Tape. A portable sharpener shaped like a tiny camera the kids loved. When I locked the door behind me, the new teal square by the frame caught the light and gleamed. I touched it with one fingertip, like a tradition I had just invented. Then I went downstairs and into the day where, as it turned out, someone I didn't expect would be waiting not to argue about color, but to ask about it. Saturday class always starts with a circle. 12 kids. 12 small stools. A plastic bin of markers that rattles like rain. We talk about what we noticed that week. A color on a shoe. The way a shadow can look like a second object. Noah raises his hand first. As usual, there was pink on the bus seats. He says, but not baby pink. Grown-up pink. I grin. Salmon. He shrugs. Maybe? It was good. We laugh. And the room loosens. Today's lesson is on contrast, how to set two truths side by side and let both be brighter for it. I draw a simple window on the big pad and shade the wall beside it. We think light is just light. I tell them, but it needs dark to show. They get it faster than most adults. Within minutes, the paper fills with lamps in night kitchens, moons over black rivers, doors opening into lit rooms. The hum of concentration is my favorite sound. Halfway through, the building's outer door opens. My classroom door is propped with a chalk wedge, so I hear the second hinge too. Footsteps pause at the threshold. I keep my back to the door and keep my voice steady. Remember, I tell the kids, we don't outline light. We draw what it touches. When I turn, my mother is there, hands clasped around her purse. Posture precise. Eyes searching the room for a script, for a strange beat. We just look at each other. She's in a navy coat, hairpinned, pearls that feel like punctuation to a sentence she hasn't written yet. The children glance up, then back to their drawings. Blessedly uninterested. Hi, I say, neutral as I can. We're in the middle of class. She nods. I can wait. Her voice is smaller than I expect. She sits in the folding chair by the supply cabinet like a parent during a recital. Except she's not here to clap. And then we do the hour. I move between tables. Fix a rolling marker cap. Refill the water cups. Crouch beside Noah to show him how to darken the corner without making a hole in the paper. My mother watches all of it. The way someone watches a foreign language, trying to map it onto words, she knows. When the session ends, the kids funnel toward the door with their art. Streaks of charcoal on their thumbs like tiny badges. Same time next week I call, bring your eyes. They grin and nod and go, it's just us. The room holds the ghost of kid noise and the smell of paper. I start stacking stools. My mother stands, then sits again. She takes a breath like someone about to jump into cold water. I went to therapy, she says. No preamble. No throat clearing. The words land between us with a weight that holds. I don't move. Okay, I say. She asked me to describe each of my children. My mother continues. Eyes on her hands. I talked about Marcus for 20 minutes. His cases. His hours. The way he is in a hospital. Sloan for 15. Hair drive. Hair. Presence. She swallows. When I got to you. Listed. Logistics. Problems to solve. Things I tried to fix. It felt correct. While I was saying it. Efficient. Her mouth trembles once and steadies. She said, tell me who Elena is. Not what she isn't. And I couldn't. Not in a way that sounded like love. The room feels suddenly too bright. A child's drawing of a lighthouse tacked to the corkboard seems to stare at me. And then I ask, She asked me your favorite color. My mother says, I didn't know. She looks up. Finally. Do you know how humiliating that is to say out loud, that a mother doesn't know her child's favorite color? She gives a small, broken laugh that isn't quite a laugh. I said white. She adds, as if confessing a crime. She smiled kindly. I think and said, white is not a color to Elena. It's a rule. I lean against the table. The old scene unspools with humiliating clarity me at 14. Rolling paint over teal, because someone told me the walls should be neutral. The way the brush squeaked, the way the air felt like it was being bleached. It's teal, I say, and my voice goes softer than I intend. Always was. My mother nods once. Slow. She reaches into her purse and pulls out something I don't recognize at first. A hardware store paint strip. Edges worn from being thumbed. The names under the swatches are ridiculous in the way paint names are: Harbor Quiet, Late Lake, Small Courage. She taps the middle one. It is almost exactly the square by my apartment door. I went to 3 stores. She says. This was the closest. I stood there so long the clerk asked if I was okay. She tucks the strip back like it's something private. It's a better gesture than words. And I'm surprised by how much that bothers me, how easily an object can step in where a sentence should be. I make myself stay with the feeling instead of making it nice. Why are you here? I ask. And not at a club managing optics. She flinches at the exact language. Because I am tired, she says. And the last word is almost a whisper. Of being the kind of woman who can host a perfect party and break her daughter inside the same night. I am tired of measuring my motherhood by other people's applause. She takes a breath. And because Marcus told me he would not attend any conversation where you were outnumbered. He said the word mediator, and I had to sit down. I feel a small, traitorous wash of fondness for my brother. Then tuck it away, so this moment stays about the two of us. What do you want from me, I ask. My mother closes her eyes. Opens them. A chance to repair? She says. I don't know how. I know how to plan. To schedule. To press. I don't know how to let a thing grow in the wrong season. She gives a humorless little smile. My therapist, Dr. Alvarez, asked me to bring 3 specifics today. Not apologies, she said. Acknowledgements. She lifts her chin. The old steel reasserting itself in a new service. Number 1. We refuse to pay $1. $200 for your art camp at 17. You went anyway. On a bus. You sold 3 prints. I told people you were resourceful like it was a cute trait. It was grit. It was belief. I am sorry I diminished it. Air moves differently in my lungs. I nod. A tiny permission to continue. Number 2. We called your school not a real college. You paid, yet announced. $400 yourself. The first semester, and more after. We framed Marcus's white coat. We put Sloane's partnership photo above the piano. We put your certificate in a drawer. I am sorry we put your work where no one could see it. Including us. I focus on a stain on the floor. A pale ring where someone's water cup sat too long. It anchors me. Number 3. At the anniversary. I said I wished you had never been born. Her voice cracks on wished. She forces the rest through. I cannot explain the calculus that made that sentence feel like air in my mouth. Fear. Pride. Old scripts. But I said it, and I do not wish it. I never did. I wish other things: safety. Control. Relief from my own anxiety. I am sorry. I don't know how to repair the violence of a sentence like that. But I am willing to learn. We stand in a silence that isn't empty. Outside, a bus exhales at the stop. Somewhere in the building. A door shuts. I realize my hands are clenched around a piece of chalk, so tight my knuckles ache. I set it down. This isn't a press conference. I say finally. You don't get points for the phrasing. It comes out harsher than I meant. But I don't take it back. Repair is not a paragraph. It's boring. It's Tuesday afternoons and consistency. It's not arguing with the teal. She nods. I know. She says. Or, I don't. But I will. I want to believe her. I also want to protect the part of me that has wanted to believe her for 28 years. Both want to sit side by side, like two colors that might clash or might harmonize if I give them enough space. Here are my conditions, I say. And the old consultant tone returns because it serves me when I'm shaking. 1. No more conversations about me without me present. Not between you and friends. Not between you and Dad and Sloan. We are done building narratives. I'm not allowed to edit. She swallows. Yes. 2. If you repeat the word misunderstanding, I will leave. The word does not apply. Choose true words: cruelty, dismissal, favoritism, control. If you can't say them, we can't talk. Her throat works. Yes. 3. You correct the record. You sent messages after the party that made it sound like I caused a medical emergency with a stunt. You will send a message to the same recipient saying you were wrong, that you spoke in anger, that you are seeking help, that I am not the villain of your story. She blinks hard. For a second, I think she might argue the word villain. And her lips part. And then she closes them. Yes, she says. And it sounds like it costs something. 4. I add, because now that I'm standing on this ground, I can see further. You sit in a room with me, and a professional, not Dr. Alvarez. Someone for us, and you don't perform. If you perform, I will stop the session. If you tell the truth, even if it is clumsy, I will stay. Yes, she says again. Her yeses are stacking like bricks. I don't know if they are building a wall or a house. And 5, I say, surprising myself. You put my work on your wall. Not as a fair share. Not as a tiebreaker. As something you are proud to look at. You take my certificate out of the drawer. You frame it. You hang it where people can see. Not for them. For you. This time she laughs. A small, astonished sound. And covers her mouth as if to catch it. I can do that. She says. I can do that today. She looks around the classroom like she is seeing it as a place now. Not a mess to tidy. Her gaze lands on a kid's drawing of a storefront with a bell over the door. Who drew that, she asks. Noah. I say. He draws the same corner over and over. It gets better every week. She nods slowly. And I can see the part of her that understands repetition. Practice. Iteration. Of course. She murmurs. Of course, that's how it works. My phone buzzes on the table. And for once, I don't flinch. It's Marcus. A simple text: breathe. You can end this at any time. I show the screen to my mother. I asked him to check in. She says. Not defensive, but transparent. He told me I don't get to control today. I asked if he would be nearby. He said he would wait in the car with terrible coffee and excellent patience. That sounds like him. I say. We both smile. Briefly. Like sunlight through cloud. She reaches into her bag again and pulls out an envelope long. Pal. The kind you use for holiday cards? She hesitates, then sets it on the table and slides it toward me. I found these, she says. Doctor. Alvarez told me to bring something that proves I can see you without instructing you. These were in a shoebox behind the winter quilts. I open the envelope and pull out 4 small pieces of paper, my preschool drawings. Scribbles. Sure. But there, it is a teal streak among the crayons. A crooked door with light leaking out. A figure with a too big heart in its chest. On the back of one, in a young mother's handwriting. 2 words, Elena's sky. My throat burns. I look up and see my mother seeing me see the words. And something unknots for a second, in both of us. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But recognition that there was once a different truth before the rules calcified. A breadcrumb. Like the mustard fleck in the album. Stubborn and real. Okay. I say. We can try. The room loosens a fraction. As if a string has been tuned closer to pitch. But if you slip, I don't chase you. I know. She says. I will slip. I will say the wrong thing. I will be tempted to make it neat. And you will not let me, and I will come back anyway. We sit in that awkward, necessary hope. She glances at the supply cabinet, then at me. May I ask one stupid question, she says. I brace. Ask. What do you teach them? She asks, nodding at the room. When the light looks harsh. When it makes everything not beautiful. I consider. We teach them that harsh light is still light. I say, you don't fake a softer sun. You soften the edges around it. You change what's next to it so it doesn't blind you. You tell the truth about what you see, and let the drawing hold it. She nods, working the idea like a marble in her palm. Okay. She says. Okay. Outside. A horn taps twice. We both know it's Marcus. My mother stands. For a moment, she looks like she might reach for me, and then thinks better of it. Good. I will call Dr. Alvarez and ask for a referral for us. She says. And I will send the message. Today. And I will buy frames. She smiles. And for the first time in a long time, it doesn't feel like a shield. And I won't repaint anything. Good. I say, because it's all that needs saying. She reaches the door and pauses. Elena, she says without turning. If anyone asks me your favorite color, I will use the right word. She steps into the hallway and is gone. I sit back down on a stool as if I've just taught 2 hours to an auditorium. My body that exhausted and that alive. I pick up the paint strip from her chair and read the name under the swatch. Again, small courage. I laugh. Real and soft. On the corkboard. The lighthouse looks less like a warning and more like a fact about the coastline. There will be rocks. And there will be light. And both can exist on the same map. My phone buzzes once more. A new text from Marcus. She's crying. Good crying. Don't worry. Then, à maman la terre. A message drops into the family group thread, where I've not typed a word in weeks. It's from my mother. It is not long. It does not try to smooth. I was wrong. It begins. I spoke with cruelty and called it honesty. I am seeking help. Elena is not to blame for our discomfort. She is our daughter. I will do the work. I stare at the screen until the one sentence finally means what it says. I don't reply. I don't have to. I slide the phone into my bag. Take a breath that goes all the way down. And start rearranging the room for the next class light here. Shadow there. Space where something new might fit. 2 days after my mother's message hit the family thread, the sky shifted from pewter to a clean, rinsed blue. I woke early, made coffee, and stood by the little teal square near my door, touching it the way people touch the frame of a picture for luck. The square looked steady. I wasn't sure I was. But steadiness is often a decision before it's a feeling. At 10 a.m., I walked into a community counseling office with a mediator's name printed on the door in calm serif type, Lydia Hart. LMFT. Beige waiting room. A ficus performing bravery. A stack of magazines that wanted to make everything aspirational. My mother had chosen the place with Dr. Alvarez's help and texted, I'll arrive first. To resist staging anything. I believed her enough to show up. Lydia's room was not beige. It was the color of unbleached paper, with one loud rug that refused to apologize for itself. I work with families, she said, offering tea, like a person who has watched too many hands shake. Rules are good. Stories are better. She asked if I wanted my mother in from the start. I said yes. If this was going to break, it could break, honestly. My mother entered with the carefulness of someone approaching a skittish animal. She didn't bring props. She didn't bring a speech. When she sat, her knees knocked mine lightly. She didn't move them away. Lydia began with scaffolding. We'll keep our sentences short. She said, we'll name what's ours. We won't litigate old nights as if we can change verdicts. We'll try for contact instead of performance. My mother nodded, then turned to me. I am here to do the boring work, she said, a faint smile. I am learning that boring is holy. I went first, because my throat would close if I didn't. When you said, we wish you were never born, I believed you. I said, it didn't come as a shock. It came as confirmation. That felt like a sentence I had already been serving. I kept my voice even. as if narrating a drawing lesson. I am choosing a different sentence now. It includes me. She inhaled shakily. I said it because I confuse relief with love. She replied. The children who satisfied my fear felt like love. The child who did not felt like risk. That is not your fault. That is my injury and my error. Her gaze was direct. You were never a risk. You were a person I refused to learn. The room didn't lurch. It re-leveled. Lydia nodded once, as if to mark the spot. Name one small action you can take this week that belongs to repair. She said to my mother. No speeches. Frame her certificate. My mother said at once. Hang it above the piano. Not in competition. In honor. And send the correction to the same list I sent the shame to. She looked at me. Today. And for you, Lydia asked, turning to me. I'll go by the house only if it's quiet. I said, no party. No audience. And I leave when I want. My voice steadied as I added, I won't trade my peace for your comfort. Lydia lifted a hand. Palm up. And you? Elena. She said gently. One small action for yourself. I thought of the paint strip in my drawer, with small courage printed under the perfect teal. I'll buy a frame for a drawing of my own. I said, I've been giving them away or storing them flat. I'll hang one in my apartment like it belongs. We kept going. Lydia gave us a rule when we began to drift into old case law. Speak from the body. Not the archive. So instead of reciting, my mother said, my stomach twists when I think of you at 14, rolling over teal. And I said, my shoulders rise when I walk into your house. And we didn't pretend those were metaphors. They were measurements. Lydia asked my mother to practice a sentence without fixing. And she did. I am ashamed. Then another. I am afraid you won't let me try. Then, almost a whisper, I am afraid I haven't earned the mother I want to be. I am afraid, I answered, that if I open the door, the old draft will rush back in. We rested there, long enough to convince our nervous systems that the floor would hold. When the hour ended, Lydia handed us a typed sheet like a recipe for people who dislike. Recipes, 4 agreements. 3 danger. 1 promise. The promise was simple. Pause is not punishment. We both signed. In the parking lot, Marcus leaned against his car with a coffee that certainly qualified as terrible. He raised his brows. I nodded. He exhaled, shoulders dropping. Okay, he said. Okay. My mother touched his forearm as if he were the banister she'd always trusted and then let go. That afternoon, I received a screenshot from my mother of the message she'd sent to the same guests who'd received her anger. It was brief. Not performative. Last week, at our anniversary, I spoke with cruelty and called it truth. I was wrong. Our daughter Elena has been the target of my fear and control. We are seeking help. If you were present, I ask that you correct anyone you hear repeating my narrative. If you reached out to Elena to pressure or scold, please do not. We are building a new story. Slowly. And we will be quiet while we do it. No flourishes. No absolution baked in. I didn't applaud. I didn't respond. I just sat with the unfamiliar sensation of someone else carrying their own weight. 2 days later, my mother texted, certificate is up. I ignored it for 6 hours on purpose. Not as punishment, but to give myself time. In the evening, Marcus called. It's crooked, he said. Deadpan. I laughed. Helplessly. Of course it is. He laughed. 2. The easy sibling sound we had always had in private. She left it crooked on purpose. Elena, he added. She said it'll remind her not to overcorrect. I went over the next morning. Early. Before anyone could gather spectators. The house I grew up in smelled the same lemon cleaner. A hint of coffee. A whisper of flowers from the front stoop. The living room looked staged. As always. But there it was above the piano. My certificate in a simple frame. A genuine place on the wall that, for years, had been a mirror of a story that didn't include me. It was slightly off level. A degree or two to the left. I stood there a long time. close enough to see the tiny flecks of ink in my name. My father came in quietly, as if approaching a skittish animal. 2. He wore the sweater he saves for company, as if I were one. He didn't try a speech either. "Hello," he said. His voice had the tired honesty of someone who'd carried a box farther than he planned. "I wanted to see you without the theater." I turned. The last time I had searched his face, I had found only annoyance. Now I found not remorse exactly, but an absence of performance that felt like a beginning. He pointed at the frame. "That should have been there a long time," he said. "I should have noticed it wasn't." He cleared his throat, then added the words he had probably practiced in the shower. "I am sorry, Elena." It wasn't pretty. It wasn't eloquent. It landed like a nail hit straight. I nodded once. "Thank you." He shifted, hands in pockets, as if resisting the urge to explain himself back into safety. "I brought something down," he said finally, turning toward the hall. He returned with a cardboard box from the garage, the kind that once held a printer. He set it on the coffee table and lifted the lid. Inside, neat stacks programs from school plays I'd done set design for, postcards I'd made in college, the newspaper clipping from my poster contest win, a coffee-stained sketch of a storefront. He looked almost sheepish. "I kept these," he said. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was waiting for you to switch lanes, but I kept them. He met my eyes. "It counts less because I kept them in silence. But it counts." The room reorganized around that admission. Not a rewrite. A footnote that changed the tone of the text. "It counts," I said. We didn't hug. We stood near each other and let a small truth exist next to a larger harm without pretending one canceled the other. My mother hovered in the doorway like a student waiting to be called on. "Can I show you something?" she asked. Not moving until I nodded. She led me to the den, where the framed photos had once been a two-image shrine, Marcus in his white coat, Sloane shaking hands at her firm. There were now 3. My certificate not flashy, not confetti, hung at the same height. Beside it, a little brass plate read Elena Novak. Designer. The label was unnecessary, and somehow exactly right. "Dr. Alvarez says props are not progress," my mother said, catching my glance at the plate. "But she also says progress can include props, as long as they're not a substitute." She exhaled. "I am trying to respect both parts." We sat at the kitchen table. She poured coffee. "No monologues." She asked one question I could answer easily. "What do you need from me this week?" I said. Nothing new. Just no 2 children in any sentence. She winced and nodded like I'd tightened a stitch. "I can do that." Sloane arrived later, brisk and composed. She looked at the frame. Something complicated moved across her face. Pride and loss in a braid. "I spoke to HR," she said to me. "Not about you, about me. About how I use words like optics to hide that I'm scared. I'm working on being brave without being sharp." It wasn't an apology. It was adjacent. "We can try again," I said. And her shoulders loosened, like she'd been waiting to hear that, but hadn't planned her next move. After an hour, my body sent the unmistakable message it had learned in therapy rooms and classrooms alike enough. I stood. "I'm leaving," I said. No one tried to keep me. At the door, my mother stopped a pace away. "I won't repaint anything," she said. We both smiled. Remembering, I touched the frame of the photo in the hall as I passed a new tradition for an old threshold. In my car. I didn't cry. I didn't check my phone. I drove to the hardware store and bought a maple frame for one of my own drawings, the one of a door slightly ajar with light spilling through. The first sketch I'd made the morning after the party. I took it home, framed it, hung it above my desk. It hung straight on the first try, which felt like a wink from the universe. I still tugged it a millimeter to the left because crooked had started to mean alive. That week, my students and I did a project on maps. Not the kind that tell you where to go. I told them. The kind that tell you where you've been. They drew paths from bed to window to breakfast, marked with tiny symbols for important moments. Toast crumbs, a spilled cup, a laugh. I added one to mine, a small teal square by a door. labeled Return Point. Under it, I wrote, Pause is not punishment. Emails stacked with good news. The FinTech student tier launched with an onboarding flow that didn't scold, and signups ticked up. The boutique hotel sent a photo of their first guest holding a coral keycard and grinning like she'd discovered a secret. When I stood to stretch, my eyes landed on the framed drawing above my desk. I realized I had made a room inside my life, where I was not the missing piece. One evening, Aunt Renee came by with soup again, and a story. Your mother called to ask what size frames to buy, she said. Amused, I told her. Buy 3 sizes? Life isn't all 8 by 10. She laughed and didn't make it neat. We ate and talked about nothing urgent. When she left, I found her note tucked by my kettle. Small courage. Repeated. Becomes a big one. On Friday, a message arrived from a number saved years ago as Mrs. Oles. Patel. A photo my poster from the city festival. Edges a little worn. Hanging in her classroom. I tell them you believed a drawing could change a room. She wrote, You changed mine. I leaned my forehead against the cool window and let myself feel that sentence all the way down. I won't pretend the story wrapped itself with a ribbon. My mother faltered twice that month, once with a stray. If you'd only, that she caught and corrected, once with a sigh loud enough to dent a room. My father still avoided prolonged eye contact when feelings rustled too loudly. Sloane walked into 2 arguments with her elbows and had to back out carefully. But the corrections came faster. The pauses grew kinder. The frame stayed up. The last Sunday before spring. We gathered in my classroom, my idea. No. Performance. No audience. I showed them what negative space looked like when you draw a family, how to outline what you are by honoring what you are not. My mother tried a few tentative strokes. My father shaded too hard. Sloane smudged and laughed at herself. Marcus drew a perfect line and then messed it up on purpose, because perfection didn't feel right anymore. We pinned the pages to the corkboard. The lighthouse still watched from its corner. Less like a warning. More like a truth about the coast. On the way out, my mother lingered. If anyone asks, she said quietly, your favorite color is teal. A beat. Mine might be changing. I raised a brow. To what? She looked around at the room, at the rug that refused to apologize. At the smudges, the kids left like autographs. At the square of sun on the floor. Small courage, she said. And we both laughed because it sounded like a color on a paint strip and a choice you could make. One Tuesday at a time. They once wished I'd never been born. For a while, I lived like a ghost in their house to grant the wish. Then I walked out, and the ghost stayed behind. What I have now is not an apology with trumpet music. It's a life with frames that hold. It's a map with doors and light. It's the steady tap of my heels on a floor I chose. And a square by my door that says, each time I touch it, you exist. And you get to stay.